briefing on the occasion of Prime Minister's visit to Jakarta for Um, a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us for this special media briefing on the occasion of Prime Minister's visit to Jakarta for the India ASEAN Summit as well as the East Asia Summit. To give us a sense of this visit, we have with us Secretary East, Saurabh Kumar, as well as Joint Secretary Indo-Pacific, Srimati Geetika Srivastava. Sir, I'll hand over the floor to you for opening remarks.
Thank you, Arindam. Good afternoon, friends. Namaskar. Thank you for joining us today for this briefing on the upcoming visit of the Honorable Prime Minister to Jakarta for the ASEAN-related meetings. At the invitation of the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Joko Widodo, Prime Minister will visit Jakarta for the 20th ASEAN India Summit and the 18th East Asia Summit, scheduled for the 7th of September. Prime Minister will participate in the ASEAN India Summit along with heads of state or government of the ASEAN member states. East Asia Summit, as you know, brings together the leadership at the leadership level, ASEAN members and 8 dialogue partners, which are Australia, China, India, Japan, Republic of Korea, New Zealand, Russia, and the United States. Prime Minister will depart Delhi on the night of 6th September and return late evening on the 7th September. Given that the G20 summit follows shortly after the ASEAN summits, it will be a short visit. We are appreciative of the Indonesian government for making adjustments to the ASEAN meeting schedule so as to facilitate Prime Minister's program and his early return. By way of background, this will be the 9th ASEAN India Summit to be attended by the Prime Minister. The summit, in a sense, is special since it is the first one after the elevation of India-ASEAN relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which happened last year. During the summit, Prime Minister will review the progress in ASEAN-India relations and provide them with further direction. India's relations with ASEAN are a central pillar of our Act East policy, as well as of India's vision of the wider Indo-Pacific. India and ASEAN have a comprehensive engagement covering a wide array of areas at all levels, including 7 ministerial engagements besides several official level ones. India and ASEAN share similar vision for the Indo-Pacific and are committed to building on the synergy between ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific and India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. This year, ASEAN is the chair. Sorry, my apologies. This year, Indonesia is the chair of ASEAN. The theme of their chairship is ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. Within this framework, Indonesia organized a flagship event, ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, to implement ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This is an event which is focused on increasing connectivity of ASEAN to the Indo-Pacific by involvement of businesses and industry. So it's a track 1.5 event which they have organized. India contributed to this by organizing a panel discussion on digital public infrastructure and its importance for enhancing digital transformation and inclusivity. Let me also give you a brief sense of the activities we undertook with ASEAN this year. Last year, India and ASEAN, as you know, celebrated the 30th anniversary of their partnership, and a number of events and activities were organized. We have continued with our active engagement with ASEAN this year as well. Our focus has been on enhancing comprehensive connectivity with ASEAN in all aspects, including physical, digital, economic, and people to people. In August this year, India and Indonesia established direct flight connectivity through Indigo and Batik Air flights. We also have started direct flights with Vietnam. Earlier in February, Prime Minister, along with his Singapore counterpart, launched uh, the real-time cross-border payment link between UPI and Singapore's Pay Now. We are looking at ways to expand this to other ASEAN countries. This year's calendar also included ASEAN India Youth Summit, held in Hyderabad in February, where 175 youth from ASEAN countries and India interacted with each other. India and ASEAN also held a conference on traditional medicines in July, focusing on pandemics. The India ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership aims to further deepen practical cooperation in areas including maritime, cybersecurity, digital economy, as well as in new and emerging areas of cooperation. In May this year, India and ASEAN organized their first maritime exercise. The first ASEAN India Defense Ministers meeting was held in November last year. Trade and business to business ties are integral to our relations with ASEAN. The fifth ASEAN India Business Summit was held in March this year in Kuala Lumpur with the aim to enhance business connectivity and supply chain resilience. In 2022-23, India and ASEAN registered a bilateral trade of US dollar 131.5 billion. It accounted for over 11% of India's trade for the year and was the second highest after India EU trade. You might recall that during ASEAN India Economic Ministers meeting earlier in August, the two sides started the review of ASEAN India Trade in Goods Agreement and agreed for its completion by 2025. The objective of the review is to make ATIGA, which is the ASEAN India Trade in Goods Agreement, more friendly and trade facilitative, as well as to enhance and diversify trade while addressing the current asymmetries. A few words on East Asia Summit, and I'll conclude after that. This is the foremost East Asia Summit. East Asia Summit is the foremost of the ASEAN-centered mechanisms in the Indo-Pacific. Since its inception in 2005, it has played a significant role in providing a platform for dialogue and discussion on matters of strategic importance to the region. India, as the founding member of the East Asia Summit, has been committed to strengthening of the mechanism and making it more effective to deal with contemporary challenges. The synergy between ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, AOIP, and Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative makes East Asia Summit an important platform to promote practical cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. The new East Asia Summit Plan of Action, which was adopted during the East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting in July this year, also prioritizes cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. At the forthcoming East Asia Summit, Prime Minister and other leaders will discuss ways to further strengthen the EAS mechanism, as well as exchange views on matters of regional and international interest. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll open the floor for questions. Yashi, why don't I start with you? Please introduce yourself and the organization you represent.
Good afternoon. This is Yeshi Seri from the New Indian Express. Is PM Modi likely to have any bilaterals with other leaders coming for the summit? And is any bilateral expected with the Chinese Premier Li Qiang?
Any more?
So Nanima from ABP Live. Just want to understand what would be the discussions around issues on Myanmar, because ASEAN had some reservations earlier, but I think now they are okay with it. If you can give some information on that. Thank you.
Siddhant?
Hi, sir. I'm Siddhant from WION. How much focus India will be putting on the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN centrality during Prime Minister's address during various meetings?
Yeah. Go ahead, Shashank.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned Shashank Matu with the Mint. So you mentioned the ASEAN India Trade in Goods Agreement. What specifically will be on the cards in terms of India's demands from the from ASEAN in terms of what we want from it, and also will the Trade in Services Agreement as well be brought up in terms of the fact that India wants to renegotiate that?
To be honest, your question is a little beyond the visit, but I think sir may like to just address that. If not, sir, I'll hand over the floor to you for this fourth question.
Yashusri, I think, as I mentioned, this is a very short visit because Prime Minister would be hosting the G20, and the effort is to participate in this important summits and get back home as quickly as possible because Prime Minister is the host for the G20. So there would not be any bilaterals during the course of the visit. Nanima, you mentioned about Myanmar. Myanmar, of course, will like other regional and international issues, is likely to come up in the discussions. Our position on Myanmar is very clear. So I would leave it at that. And, once we have the post summit briefing, if there is anything more, I would add to that. Siddhant, ASEAN centrality, I think, is a central point of our message to the ASEAN. So this definitely would be communicated. And I think some of it came out in my presentation also. Shashank, trade in goods, I think I just mentioned that the trade ministers meeting took place in August, and that is a track on which a TIGA review process would take place. So I think while trade would be referred to in general terms, but specifics of trade would be discussed in that particular forum. Thank you.
Madhuren?
सर मधुरेंद्र मैं न्यूज नेशन से जो चीन का नया मैप है वो आसियान के कई देशों सहित भारत की संप्रभुता पर सवाल खड़ा करता है। क्या इस मुद्दे पर कोई बातचीत होगी, क्या एजेंडे में होगा?
I saw on my hand there. Yeah, at the back. Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, sir. I'm Siddhant from CNN News 18. Sir, my question is same what Madhuren sir asked. So this one is regarding the map which has been issued by China. And since all these nations in Indo-Pacific came out with a statement opposing the map, China claiming their territory. So can we see some sort of a consensus being built on the sidelines of this summit and can come out some sort of a statement, strong statement against Chinese expansionist policies? Thank you.
Next.
सर मैं मनीष झा हूँ TV9 से। आपने भी बताया कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर के शेड्यूल को देखते हुए इंडोनेशिया ने अपने कार्यक्रम में थोड़ा एडजस्टमेंट किया है। अगर आप थोड़ा सा उसे बता सके डिटेल में कि पहले क्या था एंड किस तरह से एडजस्टमेंट किया गया। थैंक यू।
Behind you. Mike is behind you.
Yeah. So Sridhar from the Asian Age. Recently during the visit of the Filipino leader, we had made it very clear that the international tribunal verdict in the South China Sea has to be respected, which the award which came in the favor of Philippines a few years ago. Will this issue also be addressed at the summit or raised by India?
I think many of these are bilateral issues, but I would leave it for sir. Any other questions before? Okay. Any other? Sorry, you're standing up. Please sit down. Oh, you want to shoot? Okay. Any other questions? If not, sir, may I hand over the questions?
So let me club the first two and the last question, which are about a Chinese map and about the tribunal. It is difficult to anticipate what would be discussed when the leaders meet, but issues which are of mutual concern, regional and international, would all come up once they have their discussion. Whether there would be a consensus or not, I mean, I can't anticipate what would come out of the discussions. Manish, you asked about the adjustment in the program. Both the summits had been kept for the 7th, so as to facilitate Prime Minister coming back early. The Indonesian side was kind enough to advance the East Asia Summit timing a little bit so that Prime Minister could come back early. मैं हिंदी में भी बोल देता हूँ, आपने शायद प्रश्न हिंदी में पूछा था. प्रधानमंत्री जी वो वापस जल्दी आ सके उसको ध्यान में रखते हुए इंडोनेशियन साइड ने, जो कि ईस्ट एशिया समिट का जो कि टाइमिंग है वो थोड़ा सा आफ्टरनून में पहले था, उसको एडवांस करके फोरनून में कर दिया. सो 9 से 10 बजे तक आसियान इंडिया समिट होएगी, 15 मिनट का उसके बाद गैप होएगा और उसके बाद ईस्ट एशिया समिट होएगी. तो प्रधानमंत्री जी उसके बाद फ्री हो जाएंगे और वापस आ सकते हैं.
Thank you very much, sir. You have few more? एक मिनट. हाँ, मैप वाला सवाल से बहुत लोगों ने पूछा था, पर सर अगर आप
नहीं, मैं हिंदी में बोल देता हूँ. मैंने जो अभी बताया है, जितने भी रीजनल और इंटरनेशनल मुद्दे जो म्यूचुअल कंसर्न के हैं, संभावना है वो लीडर्स इस फोरम में डिस्कस करेंगे. अभी ये कहना मुश्किल है स्पेसिफिक टर्म्स में कि इशू ए या इशू बी डिस्कस्ड होएगा या नहीं होएगा.
Yeah, please.
I did want to ask one question about the ASEAN reaction to India's position on bringing African Union into the G20, given that ASEAN is not a member of the G20 and is an observer like the AU. Has ASEAN asked to bring this up in any of the meetings in Jakarta? And since you referred to the Prime Minister returning for the G20, today the Ministry of External Affairs has sent out invitations for a banquet that have the word Bharat. Normally Bharat is used in Hindi invitations, but in an English invitation you've written Republic of Bharat. The President of the Republic of Bharat invites the dignitaries. So I just wanted to ask if there is an official notification on the changing of the name, or is it just usage?
I'm not sure that was at all related to the visit. No, that's true, but you can't bring in. This is pushing that envelope, and I think we'll let that be on President's behalf. But on the G20 question also, I didn't get that. ASEAN is not in G20. Your question was, have they raised the issue with us? Yeah. Okay. So would ASEAN like to member G20? Is that the
And are they objecting to the fact that only
But ASEAN is not being called either. So anyway,
To the best of my knowledge, this issue
look, this is
not
a
been
G20
raised.
question. If it comes up, sir, I think. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you also to Geetika Srivastava. Thank you all for joining.